Here we go. This is the opening introductory lecture to the Crusades. I'm going to talk about the first century of the Islamic or Arabic tribe conquest of what at that particular time was the most civilized. It was the greatest civilization of the time, and I will also talk about like conquest policies, warfare policies, and things like that that lead up to the opening of the calling for the First Crusade. So, here's how we will begin. Just want to remind you that we've talked about the Great Schism and the West and the East. So, think of a line coming down this way through Greece, cutting off the little boot here to North Africa, with Carthage being the provincial seat of Western Latin Church, and then the Greek North Africa going this way, with Alexandria being the main provincial bishop or patriarchate. This is Constantinople, which is the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and across the little isthmus there is Nicaea. All right, so here's what we've got to say. Persia is over here, and the Byzantine Empire spent many decades upon centuries fighting with the Persians. Your favorite emperor and mine, Justinian, had done yearly campaigns against the Persians. Finally, he had to just make a treaty with them so that he could solidify the eastern borders of the Byzantine Empire so that he could go west to reconquer the west that had been overrun by the Ostrogoths. After Justinian's peace falters, and that's, okay, so remember, that's 553 into the latter part of the 550s. After that peace falters, then the Byzantine Empire has to go back to fighting the Persians. The emperor, his name was Phocas. The emperor Phocas was having a terrible time. He could not stop the Persians from continuing to whittle away at the eastern border of the Byzantine Empire. Because of that, one of the admirals of the Byzantine Empire, who was actually a Carthaginian, led a mutiny against Phocas, and he won, so that he, and the admiral's name is Heraclius. Heraclius becomes the emperor in like 611. Okay, now here's the Arabian Peninsula down here. When all of this stuff is going on in Byzantium, and you have the Persians and the Byzantines have basically beaten one another into submission, weakening their armies, you have the Arabic tribes who have rallied around Muhammad and his revelation and his dictum to get idolatry out of the Arabian Peninsula. By 632, when Muhammad died, idolatry was gone from the Arabic Peninsula, and the tribes had been united under his revelation and religion, Islam, and in the Arabic Peninsula, Jews and Christians were paying a tribute tax to the Muslims if they didn't convert to Islam. Now, when the tribes started moving this direction after Muhammad's death. So Muhammad dies in 632. They move this way and this way. So what occurs is the northern move is almost unhindered because the Byzantine armies have been so depleted by their fight with the Persians. So the Arabic armies move on Persia, they move on Byzantium, and then they move westward to basically take over North Africa. As a matter of fact, by 634, Carthage is destroyed. So they move from here, from the Arabic Peninsula, Cairo, Alexandria, across North Africa into Carthage. So by 634, within 2 years after Muhammad had died, the Arabic army had made its way to Carthage. It had also made its way this way through Jerusalem, through what we would call Palestine, Antioch, Damascus, to Nicaea, and had actually sacked and destroyed Nicaea. By 643, the Arabic tribes, which were here in the peninsula by 632, within 12 years, they're at Constantinople, or outside of Constantinople, and they have made their way to Carthage, still moving this way. And they have made it into Persia. In 717, the Muslim armies lay siege to Constantinople, but because the city was walled and kind of on a hill, they weren't able to conquer Constantinople in 717. They were beaten back across the little waterway back into Nicaea, which they had conquered by then. Spain had been conquered by 712, and it had become, basically, let me be honest, it had basically become the land to practice the jihad. They got to Spain and began to pillage this entire area. Now, here's one of the things, kind of like in terms of their strategy. As they were moving across the countryside, if they came across a village or a settlement, they would absolutely destroy it. They would destroy the buildings, the huts, the houses, and the people. And it was merciless. And they would also burn crops as they're moving through. Cities were different, though. When they came to a city, they would capture and deport people to sell them into slavery, because this was a way to make money, selling people into slavery. Now, what they would do is, for the people who couldn't be deported or who wouldn't be deported, they would leave some indigenous people, people from the city, and those people would pay tax if they wouldn't convert. They would, and the tax that they would pay is basically the tribute that would be paid to the caliphates or the Muslim leaders. This tribute tax created a non-Muslim working poor. In English, this non-Muslim working poor were called the dhimmi. Now, in these conquered areas, if you are non-Muslim, you couldn't own property. So you would basically be renting and producing things for the Arabic conquerors. All right, so here we go. That mentality is in the Iberian Peninsula or Spain, establishing a caliphate, and it basically becomes a place for money, gaining money. They moved into Gaul or France, and in 732 were stopped at the Battle of Tours. It actually happened somewhere between Tours and Poitiers. 732, Charles Martel, a predecessor or relative of Charlemagne, he puts a stop to the incursion of the Arabic armies moving this way into the Mediterranean. So since they were stopped here as in their land grab, the Muslims started to conscript ships and started piracy, and this is a boat, starting piracy in the Mediterranean and basically bombarding coastal areas and gaining loot that way. In 843, they actually landed and tried to sack Rome. These pirates landed in the Italian, they're bombarding the Italian countryside or the shoreline, and just decided, well, let's see what we can do in Rome. Now, they weren't actually able to take Rome, but they continued to do their piracy activities through the 800s. Okay, coming back over here. In 1009, the Fatimid Caliph, whose name is Al-Hakim, destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is in Jerusalem. This is a church that was built by Constantine, supposedly built over the tomb that Jesus' body was laid in. This was a very important pilgrimage site for Christians. It's destroyed in 1009, and it makes Christians go insane, really. I mean, they kind of lose their mind that this is one of their most holy sites. It didn't immediately start some kind of a reaction, but it is still kind of in people's minds leading up to the call for the First Crusade. Okay. Then you have the Seljuk Turks, who'd come from Persia way, and they went to battle with the Byzantine army. And in 1071, the Seljuk Turks destroyed the entire army of the Byzantine Empire. Just wiped it completely out at the Battle of Manzikert. So what you have is now a Byzantium that really doesn't have an army to speak of. The emperor who lost at Manzikert is then replaced by a new dynasty. And this new dynasty is called the Komnenian dynasty. Komnenian. The emperor who asked for help against the Seljuk Turks is Alexis the First Komnenos. Alexis starts asking for aid from the West to come and help support Byzantium and help the Byzantine army, which doesn't really exist, recapture Asia Minor and Palestine. This is the goal. In 1090, Alexis starts asking the West for help. In 1095, he sends an official delegation from Constantinople to Rome to make a specific plea with the Pope at the time, who is Pope Urban II. Okay, here's what I've got to say to you. There is no one in the West who has the ability to marshal together, gather together an army, except the Pope. When we think, okay, so if in our current time we think, how would a coalition of peace, a coalition peacekeeping force, how would that thing get mobilized? How would it be gathered together? In our day and age, we've got something called the UN. The United Nations can gather together from participating nations a peacekeeping force that can intervene in places where some real terrible things are happening. In 1090, no such organization exists except the church. The church in the West is a trans-regional, and at this time, by 1090, a transnational entity. The Bishop of Rome is loyal to no one, though all are loyal to the bishop. Because in the West, you still have the remnants of the Carolingian Empire and the union between that empire and the Bishop of Rome. Now remember, the Bishop of Rome was not a cabinet position in the Carolingian Empire, but there was still an alliance between the two. Pope Urban and the Bishop of Rome transcends all of the nation states that are forming after the breakup of the Carolingian Empire. So Alexis goes to Pope Urban and asks, can you get an army together? And he does. He calls the Council of Clermont in 1095. And he asks for the nations of the West to gather together armies and go and liberate Christians from the oppression that's going on. Now here's the thing. It is not lost on anybody in the West the things that are going on. You don't have news. You don't have journalists and reporters making television feeds back. But what you do have are, one, pilgrims from the West who tell stories of the things that are going on. As a matter of fact, it's not always a safe endeavor to move from here into pilgrimage. It's dangerous. The second thing is it's not only the testimony of pilgrims. The second thing is they know what's going on because it's going on. It's been going on in this area. So even though the Italian peninsula is not a caliphate, you've had pirates for 150 years. You have Spain, which is in fact a caliphate. You have annual raids coming from the Iberian Peninsula into Gaul. This is typical. So it's not as if the West doesn't know what's going on. They do. So at the Council of Clermont in 1095, Pope Urban II calls for a treaty amongst all of the excuse me, of all of the Western nations to form a coalition to go to Byzantium to help Alexius Comnenus. Prior to Urban II, there was a bishop. His name is Bishop Gregory VII Hildebrand. Gregory VII Hildebrand. The reason why I bring him up is because Gregory was trying to put together a Western army after Manzikert. And one of the things that he proposed was there are all kinds of mercenaries and marauders running around in the Western territories. Stealing, pillaging, burning, I don't know. I mean, you've got professional bandits. This is how they make their money. This is what they do. And in that sense, the Western professional bandits really aren't any different than the Arabic tribes who are expanding and then making their money based upon conquest. The thing is that these professional bandits aren't about conquest, land grabbing, and then creating civilizations. They're just stealing. So what Gregory VII tries to do is get those professional bandits, those professional criminals, and make them a mercenary army and send them to Byzantium to fight. Now, Gregory VII couldn't actually get this off the ground because he got into a fight with Henry II, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and actually got forced into exile. Okay? But he was trying to do this, and when Urban II calls for the First Crusade, which begins in 1096, he does what Gregory VII had done before him. He called on all professional bandits to take up your arms, take up your weapons, and go. And take your aggression and funnel it in an appropriate manner for the liberation of Christian Byzantium. So, in 1096, the First Crusade is launched. It moves eastward, and Alexius Comnenus gets the Western armies to promise fealty, to promise to come underneath his rulership. Because what he didn't want was this huge Western army to come in and then take his Byzantium and his kingdom. So, the Western army recaptures Nicaea and moves through Antioch, Damascus, Jerusalem, and retakes Jerusalem, liberating it from the Muslim caliphate that is there, and basically liberates or removes the Islamic presence in Asia Minor. So the First Crusade is wildly successful because there is an alliance between the East and the West. Okay, now it's not the greatest kind of treaty, but it is an alliance. There's a cooperative endeavor, and it is successful. The Holy Land is liberated, and they establish outposts in Palestine, establishing outposts where Nicaea is given back to Alexis. Asia Minor is liberated for the Byzantine Empire, so they regain this. And you basically have what amounts to the creation of Palestine bases, like military bases. There are 4 of them. Antioch, Damascus, Tripoli, and Jerusalem. Okay? These are the 4 Western military bases that are fortified and established at the end of the First Crusade, which ended in 1099, and Urban had died before Jerusalem was liberated. All right, this ends the introduction to the political atmosphere that's going on, that enabled the expansion of the Arabic tribes into the Persian civilization, the Western civilization, and the Byzantine civilization. And then the alliance that is made, which is the First Crusade, between the West, led by Pope Urban II, and the Byzantine Empire, led by the Emperor Alexis I.